Mira,
you know?
ustedes no se han puesto a pensar que maybe los aliens somos nosotros,
I doubt it.
los so-called humans,
I doubt
que
it.
los antepasados vinieron de otro planeta, invadieron el planeta. Y los que están por ahí escondidos, que son supuestamente aliens, son los habitantes de este planeta que tuvieron que esconderse.
Well, that would be a Bollywood twist, you know. I don't think that's the case, but I'd be intrigued
¿Por
to see
qué
if
no?
that's true. It's always nice to be part of an invading species, you know. I would like to play the villain in a story every once in a while.
¿Quién sabe?
I'm joking, of course.
O sea, al humano le encanta invadir sitios. Lo traen ¿cómo es? En el ADN.
That's part of any species, though. Any species that is a predator will want more territory so they can spread out. So
Well, I'm not a predator.
We're naturally carnivores, so unfortunately, we are already.
I am
predators.
the sweetest thing in planet Earth.
Sure.
Sobre todo.
So yeah, in terms of what NASA has to say about it, they're saying that like they need more science and less stigma to understand UFOs. So the study of UFOs is going to require new scientific techniques, including advanced satellites, as well as a shift in how unidentified flying objects or UFOs are perceived. Because they're coming at it from like a more like informational approach instead of sensational.
De aquí como a 80 años, en las universidades van a enseñar la historia de los extraterrestres.
Oh yeah, probably.
Después que no cojan este show para darlo de
Con su
referencia.
raza. Sí, porque van a decir, mira, para el año de las guácaras para allá, esta gente estaba tratando de dejar saber cuando todavía no se dejaba saber.
Yeah.
Chan,
I need to
chan,
stop.
chan, chan.
And in a 33-page report
cabrón.
released by NASA, an independent team commissioned by NASA cautioned that the negative perception surrounding UFOs poses an obstacle to collecting data. Because the general ambient, like, around the common public when it comes to aliens is that half seem to be split, right? It seems to be split perfectly down the middle between people who... Well, actually, I guess we should split that further. Some people believe aliens exist and others don't. And then forget about the people who don't believe that they exist. They're not important for this analogy. The people who do believe that they exist are split between the people who are scared and the people who...
You are completely right, my friend. You are.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then the people who are excited, the weirdos, like me. You know what I mean?
Well, I am kind of in between.
Yeah.
Yo estoy excited, pero a la misma vez kind of scared, porque, repito, como hay humanos evil
Yeah.
y humanos buenos,
Yeah.
los aliens también. Y yo no sé si los que andan por ahí, los que están más cerca, los que están aquí, son buenos o malos. So I'm coming in between of those.
I think we first have to make sure that they actually exist before we start talking about their
Well, they
morality.
do
You know what
exist, Kadicha. Usted me hace decir.
I mean?
Tú no crees en ellos, pero ellos creen en ti.
I don't...
¿Sabe Dios cuántos te han conocido ya? Te llevas mejor. ¿Sabe Dios la que te entrenó es una alien? Por eso te llevas con ella.
I don't think so, but
Of
you
course
know.
que tú no vas a pensar, ¿no?
So yeah, but officials said NASA's involvement should help reduce the stigma around what it calls UAPs. They're hoping to like calm people down. You
Hacerlo
know what I mean?
normal.
Yeah, normalize it probably because I imagine.
Porque saben que están aquí.
Yeah, I imagine if they're going through all this trouble to get you to not only accept that aliens are real, but also that they're not necessarily a threat. It's because they're like, we're gonna meet them very soon.
Yo creo que los aliens no nos están tratando de atacar, pero como ellos conocen a la población, tienen miedo de que la población ataque a los
They're
aliens.
like, let's butter them up and get them used to the idea of there being friendly aliens before we introduce you to them.
Tú sabes
And I'm
que
like, why would you need to do that?
desde que salió todo este reguero de películas que empezaron a salir de aliens, yo siempre he dicho, nos están preparando para algo.
Ujú. Es lo que te digo, las movies nos dicen cosas.
And because I have a very vivid imagination, I like to imagine that means that there's a good alien species that we are trying to help fight a bad alien species. That probably means that the bad alien species is stronger than both of us. So we're fucked, you know, if we have to team up.
Y los Simpsons, ¿nunca hablaron de él?
Sí.
Sí.
But I'm assuming that's like also far-fetched. I don't know if this will even be a thing. You know what I mean? And if it's gonna be a thing, I would like to be alive for it.
Son
Note
reales.
that down. Anyway, officials stressed the panel found no evidence that UAPs had extraterrestrial origin, of course. But
Porque lo que te digo, puede ser un tipo de vida interna.
and then like Bill Nelson, he's a NASA administrator, acknowledged with billions of stars and billions of galaxies out there, another Earth could exist. I don't also sidebar here, okay? This is the scientist in me that's about to come out, right? I really don't like when people immediately assume that all life has to look like life on Earth.
That pissed me off too.
That doesn't make any sense.
No.
Viven en otro
With
planeta.
so many
porque
different atmospheres out there, why on Earth do we think that all life has to be based, first of all,
Because
on
el
water?
humano es un idiota y se cree que es el centro del mundo.
Ok.
Como si con tantos planetas que hubieran en él, que hay por ahí.
Yeah.
¿Sí me entiendes?
There's
Se
literally
me
so
fue el
many,
hilo.
I mean, as we speak at the moment, there are what they call like nurseries, like galaxies that basically exist to give birth to like more stars. You know, as we speak, they're currently in action. Right, like there are stars forming every second of every day, and I'm not sure why.
Se pasan haciendo cuchi todo el tiempo.
That's not how that works. I'm not gonna explain how stars form because that's an advanced topic. But
Ellos dicen el chipihuahua.
no.
24/7.
Oh, good God, man. No, it's just there's a bunch of complicated stuff I'm not gonna get into. So the point is that with all those galaxies out there, and also different atmospheres probably beget like different forms of life. The only reason that the life that formed on Earth is like carbon based and water based, because all life on Earth in some way depends on water. You know what I mean? Whether it's that they live in water, breathe in water, give birth in water, etc., like fish and all the stuff that's in the sea, or like humans that are made up of like 90% of water. You know what I mean? And we have to drink it constantly. All animals depend on water for something, and that's because we were evolved or created, whatever you believe. You know what I mean? You could be both, but we're on a planet where that's the conditions that were around when life started to evolve.
Exacto.
So of course life evolves according to the conditions that are present. So if different conditions exist on a different planet, that doesn't mean that no life exists. It just means it's not going to look like what we expect.
Exacto, son otro tipo de vida, por eso es que...
Yeah, and they would probably look vastly different. We might not even be able to understand how something like that exists before we see it. And even then when we see it, I imagine that the human brain is going to have a hard time comprehending what it's looking at. Because our eyes also evolved to see different types of things. You know what I mean? For example, we see an invisible light spectrum. I'm not going to go into detail about what that means, right? But it's basically like all the colors of the rainbow. That's what our eyes evolved to be able to see because that's how the sun works. It shoots out rays of light, and that's pretty much what we see reflected back. You know what I mean? Bouncing off of objects, we see color. On a planet though, that's further from the planet, like from the star at the center, they might not necessarily need to see invisible light spectrum. You know what I mean? They could see in like microwaves or X-rays or something like that. Like
Así que ven.
Yeah, like that's how they see quotation marks. You know what I mean? Their senses might have evolved completely differently. They might not look anything
Esta
like.
sabe hasta como los aliens ven.
No, I'm just positioning, like I'm positing an idea. You know what I mean? So yeah, it doesn't make sense to me to assume the end of the rant is that it doesn't make sense to me to assume that any life that we see has to be like Earth.
Pues claro que
You know
no,
what I
porque
mean?
eso depende cuáles sean las condiciones del lugar.
Yeah, a lot of people are they narrow their
El
possibilities.
pescado no puede vivir fuera del
Yeah.
agua.
And it's like
Pero vive en el
a
agua,
lot of
existe.
scientists in the world, they narrow their own possibilities for themselves because they assume that what we see is the truth of the entire universe. But we are so limited in our understanding of even our own planet.
No entendemos nuestra cuadra bien, vamos a entender el planeta entero.
We don't even understand what's in our own ocean. Why on earth do we think we are the authority on what can and cannot exist out
Eso,
in
eso
space?
es otra teoría, que los aliens tienen una civilización en el fondo del mar.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a couple minutes.
Yeah, they live over there.
Yeah. And if you ask me, that's what Nelson says, do I believe there's life in the universe that's so vast that it's hard for me to comprehend how big it is? My personal answer is yes. Yeah, obviously, this guy seems a little more common sense than most scientists I've seen.
Ven acá, y si esas naves que se ven y pendejan en una realidad alterna, ¿qué se está pasando para esta?
Eso todo.
Tema para otro día.
Yeah.
And as it has said, it doesn't actively search for unexplained sightings, but it operates a fleet of It doesn't actively search for it. Yeah, sure, whatever. But it operates a fleet of Earth-circling spacecraft that can help determine, for example, whether weather is behind a strange event.
Mira lo que dice aquí. Y si te estoy oyendo lo que yo
Yeah.
estaba hablando ahora. Madre mía.
Yeah. So, like, you know...
Madre mía, que se quedó pegada en esto.
It's all the same basic stuff. It's just talking about what NASA thinks life might be like, you know what I mean? I've exhausted myself with that rant, so let's move on. Goodness.
No, pero es interesante.
Yeah. So, yeah. Just the whole point of what I just said and what NASA just said is that probably life, if it shows up and if we ever see it on our planet, will probably not look how we expect it to. And that doesn't mean you have to panic. Don't freak out if you see something weird just because you don't know what it is.
Obvio.
You know
O
what I
sea,
mean?
uno se cree que es un skinwalker y es un alien.
Well, you also don't want to confuse a skinwalker for
Y
an
los
alien.
lizard people, ¿no serán aliens que vinieron de otro planeta
Nunca sabe.
y se camuflajean de humanos?
Yeah.
Maybe.